Tiny, tiny, tiny table talks.
Welcome back to Tiny Table Talks. We're continuing our conversation about deconstruction today, and today we're talking about what it means to deconstruct worship. Essentially, what we're talking about is the notion that worship has to be one thing or one way. A lot of us grew up in different faith traditions, and so for some of you, maybe hymns played on an organ is the way worship is supposed to work. For others of you, you grew up in a church that had a full band. Some of you grew up in churches where there was no instruments at all, a non-instrumental sort of a church. But all of us have different experiences with worship. What if I told you that worshiping God isn't just about songs? I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Today we're asking about what does worship even mean? In order to do that, I want to introduce you to three of our worship team members, Justin, Kirsten, and Jennifer. Each of them will share with you what worship means to them.
You know, to me, worship or connecting with God is something that I find just as much outside of church as in, whether it be experiencing someone using the gifts God's given them, making an entire room full of people laugh with just a microphone with a stand-up comedy performance, or, a group of jazz musicians just really locking in and taking the music to a place where I didn't expect them to go. You can just feel that there's more going on. I also find myself experiencing connection to God more so with my children, seeing things through their eyes as they experience things for the first time. Whether it's taking the kids for the first time to a march or rally against oppression, or watching Nora watch TV and seeing that a woman can be vice president. It's oftentimes times like these when through their childlike eyes, that I see the wonders of God.
Worship to me is about the position of your heart. It's about being willing to receive and reflect. Maybe that's a few seconds, maybe that's a few hours. It's taking that gratitude that you feel and saying or thinking back to God, thank you. Thank you for creating this. The peace, the comfort I feel from being out in nature, or the humor that I find in friends and loved ones. It's things like this that I worship in God. I thank Him and I tell Him how truly amazing He is for creating such things. All things.
What is worship to me? I know the meaning of worship has changed for me over the years. I used to think that worship was just singing songs to God. But now I think that worship can be whenever you experience a connection with God. This, of course, can still be through music, but also many other things. Let me explain. I can remember as a small child swinging on my swing set in the backyard, looking up at the clouds and making up songs thanking God for them. I know that was one of my first experiences with true worship. But as I grew up, I was taught that worship was really just singing songs to God, singing hymns specifically to God in my small church. Although I have always loved music, singing, and playing it, singing the same hymns over and over just lost their meaning for me. As a teen, I fell in love with Amy Grant's music and how she could pour out her heart in a song. So for a while, contemporary Christian music was how I experienced worship. Then in college, I started going to Over the Rhine concerts. Now, they're not a Christian band per se, but the songs that they wrote had so much truth and love and heartache in them, I found that I was experiencing God in all of their music. It totally changed how I viewed worship. I, of course, adored the explosion of new worship music in the early 2000s, starting with Hillsong. And I definitely felt God move in my life through that, but I kept finding God in other ways as well. I would feel His Spirit when watching a really good movie, reading a fiction book, hearing a random song on the radio, taking a walk in nature. But best of all, I found myself experiencing God in conversations with friends. I find myself in worship just spending time with them talking about our faith. Now in this new chapter, I find myself again being on a worship team. But it's so different. We have found that some of the songs we used to sing just do not hold up with how we see God moving in us now. So to my delight, we're finding God in new songs that I would have never thought to listen to before. I cannot wait to hear how all of you experience God in worship too.
As I've deconstructed my own faith over the years, and reconstruct it in new ways that honor God. I have found that worship is so much more than just music. Worship is essentially connecting with God, letting God know that you're there, and recognizing that God is there also. So, as you continue to deconstruct and reconstruct your faith, don't assume that any one thing that you've been told or taught is absolutely true unless you see it lived out in the lives of the people who love God and in your own life. Thank you so much for joining us at Tiny Table Talks.